is to identify the exact value of each trigonometric function. So what are trigonometric functions? That is sine, cosine, tangent, and the reciprocals, cosecant, secant, and cotangent. So I put up here to start with SOHCAHTOA. So this is a reminder. This represents your sine, and the reciprocal of sine, I always tell myself S can't go with S. That's my reminder. In the past, myself, when I was younger, and a lot of students, they get mixed up. How do I remember which one is the reciprocal of sine? Remember, S cannot go with S, okay? And C cannot go with C. Do you guys see that? Very, very common mistake is students want to put this cosine with cosecant, okay? S can't go with C. All right, so sine and cosecant are reciprocals. That means whenever you get a sine of an angle, if you flip it, you have the cosecant. When you get a cosine and you flip it, you have the secant. The most difficult part for students is the tangent and the cotangent. So tangent represents opposite over adjacent. Notice that opposite is your sine and adjacent is your cosine. So tangent is just a little more work. It's sine divided by cosine. It is sine divided by cosine. And the reciprocal, which is cotangent, so I'm going to flip the order, is cosine divided by sine. Those have to be memorized. As a review, we often, because we've been programmed to think about a chart like this in terms of being 4 different quadrants, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we think of them in terms of x's and y's. Bless you. But remember, your x's are really your c, your cosines, and your y's are really your sines. So CBS, cosine before sine. So in this position, we have positive cosine, positive sine, negative cosine, positive sine. Both cosine and sines are negative. And in quadrant 4, cosine positive, sine negative. So let me stop. Does anybody have questions for me? This has to be memorized. Okay. Now, I am going to provide you the day before you take the test, you're going to get a blank unit circle. And I'm going to give you time, like maybe 5 minutes or so, 5-6 minutes, for you to fill out the entire unit circle. This is the day before the test. So the day before the test, you'll fill out the unit circle. I will not grade that, so if it's wrong, it's wrong, okay? If Michelle happens to fill out the unit circle, she goes home, she looks it over, and she's like, crap, I made a mistake when I was filling out the unit circle. Then when she gets her test the next day and I passed her the unit circle she completed, she can feel free to change it before she starts the test. The only purpose is when you get to problems like this, it'll be helpful to already have a unit circle that's filled out. Good? All right, so for today, I'm going to just make a very simple unit circle, and I'm only going to consist of these 3 angles, and we'll refer to them as the reference angles as we go through this. So remember, we learned how to identify the ordered pairs using special triangles, 30, 60, 90, and 45, 45, 60. And then I taught you a way that's nothing to do with math, it just helps you memorize them. What number do you start with? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 2's on the bottom of everything. And then the top of everything, I'm going to go back and take the square root of. The square root of 1 is 1. I get to leave it. The square root of 2 and 3 are irrational. Square root of 1 is 1. Square root of 2 and 3 is irrational. This is the information you need to know before we start the next step. All right, so here's our first problem. We're going to try to do 4 or 5 difficult problems. Your first problem is the cotangent of 7 pi over 6. So the first thing, there's 3 steps you have to do with every problem. The first thing is you have to go, where do I even find that on the unit circle? So 7 pi over 6. So here I'm going to start counting. Here's 1 over 6, 2 over 6, 3 over 6, 4 over 6, 5 over 6, 6 over 6, 7 over 6. Can you do me a favor? Thumbs up or thumbs down if you understood how I got to 7 pi over 6. Okay, now here's the next part that's already been taught to you that you may or may not have mastered. Please do not shout the answer, but think in your head, what is the answer? Would we consider this a reference angle of 30, 45, or 60? Raise your hand if you know, but don't say the answer out loud. One person, two people. Okay, Eastby, what do you believe it is? 30, right. So watch. This measures the same distance as this measures back to the x-axis. That means I get to take this ordered pair and I get to write it over here. Step 1, locate this angle on the unit circle. Step 2, use reference angles to come up with the ordered pairs. Then step 3 is we have to decide the signs. Remember, in our minds, most of us think of this as an x and y, but really it's a cosine and a sine. In quadrant 3, both of these are negative. Once again, step 1, locate the angle. Step 2, decide the reference angle so we know what ordered pair it is. Step 3, put the proper signs along with the cosine and sine. Okay, so now step 4, cotangent. So I have to come up here. A tangent is sine over cosine. So the cotangent is the reciprocal, which is, so right, cosine divided by sine. Cosine of this angle divided by the sine of this angle. Cosine, cotangent, and tangent are just a little bit more work than the ones up above, okay? These are a little more work. So I need to go, what is the cosine at this angle? The cosine is negative radical 3 over 2 divided by the sine, which is negative 1/2. When you divide angles, division turns into multiplication. You take the reciprocal of the second angle. And now let's go back to 7th grade. You already know that a negative times a negative is a positive. So I've taken care of the negatives. Also, we can see that I can cross cancel here. A 2 on the bottom cancels with the 2 at top. And as a reminder, when we say cancel, really what number do they turn into? A 1. So this is really a 1 and this is really a 1. Okay, so I have radical 3 times 1, which is radical 3, and 1 times 1 is 1. This would be a legit answer. If you go, you know what, I know that radical 3 divided by 1 is just simply radical 3, that's fine as well. Either one of these is totally acceptable. Let's walk through the steps because this is difficult stuff. Step 1 is I located where it was on the circle. Step 2 is I use reference angles to decide what is the ordered pairs. Step 3 is I identified whether they're positive or negative. And then I had to come back and go, what does cotangent mean? It means cosine divided by sine. I plugged in the appropriate values and then I just completed the math. Okay, you ready? So first problem, you're understanding. Not can you do it by yourself, you're understanding 1 through 5 right now. Totally fine to be a 1 or 2. Most people in first hour are still a 2 at the end. Okay, here's your next problem. Let's this time do cosine of negative 5 pi over 4. Step 1, locate where this is. So in my mind, I'm going to work through this a little bit slower. I got to first go, forget about the negative, where would I find 5 pi over 4? So I know I'm going with the 45-degree angles. Okay, so I'm going to count by 4s. 1 over 4, 2 over 4, 3 over 4, 4 over 4, 5 over 4. Yes, this is where 5 pi over 4 is. I went half of a circle plus an additional 45 degrees. Since it's negative, we learned this week that instead of going upwards from the starting point, I have to go down. So again, how did I get there? I went 180 and an additional 45. So now I'm going to go 180 the opposite way and an additional 45. Here is our new spot. That's step 1. Identify where it is. Some students prefer to put this into a degrees and then go the opposite way to find it. That's fine as well. Step 2. The reference angle is from this point back to the x-axis. How many degrees? Is it 30, 45, or 60? So I look at my 45 and I write it down. Step 2, use your reference angle to decide the ordered pair. Step 3 is go back and look at that cosine and sine and decide should they be positive or negative. Cosine like x's in quadrant 2 are negative. Sines like y's in quadrant 2 are positive. Okay, now just as a reminder, when you do these top 4 trig functions, it seems to be quite a bit easier than doing the bottom 2, okay? So what is the cosine? What is the cosine at this angle? Remember CBS, cosine before sine. Answer is negative radical 2 over 2. Problem done. One to 5 again, just so I know where we are, 1 to 5. I'm seeing a lot of 3s, some 2s, a few 4s. Okay. Here's your next problem. Cosecant of pi over 3. Step 1, we need to locate where is pi over 3 in the unit circle. Now remember, for the ones we have memorized, our denominator can be turned into a 6 or a 4. So am I going to turn this into a 6 or a 4? A 6. I'm going to do that by multiplying by 2 and multiplying by 2. You may have memorized where pi over 3 is. Good for you. But not everybody has. So really this is equivalent to 2 pi over 6. So let's count. Where's 2 pi over 6? 1 over 6, 2 over 6. So this is the angle. And because it's positive, it's right up here. So I already actually have the answer. It makes life pretty easy. So I have found the angle, and I've already identified the ordered pair, and I already know if it's positive or negative because it's in quadrant 1. I've done the first 3 steps. The next step is, what is this reciprocal of? Remember, C's and S's can't go together. So what is this reciprocal of? It's the reciprocal of sine. So we have to think to ourselves, what is the sine at this angle? CBS, the sine is radical 3 over 2, right? So over here, just off to the side, I'm going to write radical 3 over 2. The sine is radical 3 over 2. But I need to find the reciprocal of that. So the reciprocal of radical 3 over 2 is actually 2 over radical 3, right? Yep. Now, mathematically, this is not wrong, but it's not proper. It's like starting a sentence without capitalizing the first letter. So why is this wrong? Why is it not proper? Because we have a radical on the bottom. So how do we get rid of it? We're going to take the top and bottom by radical 3. 2 radical 3 over 3 times 3 is 9. The square root of 9 is 3. That's your official answer. A great question somebody asked last hour is, how do I determine if it's positive or negative? With reciprocals, you look at this. If this was positive, this remains positive. 1 through 5 right now. Okay, still got a couple 2s, but we definitely have some 3s and 4s. Okay, here's your next one. Tangent of negative pi over 6. So I'm first going to just think of this as a pi over 6. Where do I find pi over 6? So I come back up here, and 1 pi over 6 is right here. But it was a negative, which means I have to go down. So this is my position. So that's step 1. Step 2 is, what is this reference angle? Is this 30, 45, or 60? It is 30. So I get to take the ordered pairs for 30 and rewrite them. That's step 2. Step 3 is to go back to those ordered pairs and decide, should the cosine and sine be positive or negative? In this position, cosine like x's is positive and sine is negative. Tangent is opposite over adjacent, which is sine of an angle divided by the cosine of an angle. When I look back to that position, I'm going to write down the sine first, divided by the cosine second. Division turns into multiplication. I take the reciprocal of the second fraction. Just to ensure I don't make any mistakes, a negative times a positive is always negative. The 2's cancel. Remember, when they cancel, they really turn into 1's. And I don't need to worry about this negatives now. So 1 times 1 is 1, and 1 times radical 3 is radical 3. Mathematically, I've made no mistakes, but this is not proper. The reason is I cannot have a final answer with a radical on the bottom. So I'm going to take the top and bottom by radical 3. I end up with negative 1 radical 3. 3 times 3 is 9. The square root of 9 is 3. It's not necessary. So she just said, could I have a negative radical 3 over 3? Totally fine. Yep. Okay, I'm going to challenge you. Here's your problem to try. I'm going to give you a minute and a half. You'll have to rely on some math that you learned probably in 5th and 6th grade. Your problem is the tangent of 3 pi over 2. Going to time you and begin. For time purposes, I'm going to stop you. Let's do this together. Where do I find 3 pi over 2? Right down here. What is the ordered pair down here? 0, negative 1. Tangent is sine of an angle divided by the cosine. So I can actually even write it like sine over cosine. So what is the sine of this angle? What is the cosine? How many of you have a final answer of 0? Hands up high. Who can tell me why those people are wrong? The answer is undefined. Here's how I learned it when I was young. Okay, ready? If 0 is on top, you're good to go. The answer is 0. If 0 is on the bottom of a fraction, no good. The final answer is undefined.